Ambassador Sarah adjusted her formal diplomatic robes for the 100th time as the transport shuttle approached the massive Galactic Council station. The crystalline structure stretched across several kilometers of space, its bioluminescent corridors pulsing with the gentle rhythm that the architects claimed promoted peaceful thoughts. Through the viewport, she could see dozens of other shuttles carrying representatives from across the galaxy, each one arriving for what many considered the most important session in Council history. "Nervous?" asked her aide, as he reviewed the diplomatic protocols on his tablet. The young man had been with the human embassy for only 6 months, but his quick mind and ability to memorize the countless cultural nuances of 73 different species had made him invaluable. Sarah smiled, the expression carefully practiced to appear serene and confident. "Not nervous, cautious. There's a difference." She turned back to the viewport, watching as their shuttle was guided into one of the docking bays. "Remember, we're here to listen, observe, and maintain our reputation as the galaxy's most reasonable species. The Council values our input precisely because we don't react emotionally to complex situations." It had taken humanity nearly 2 centuries to build that reputation. When the first human ships had stumbled upon the galactic community in 2387, they had been seen as just another primitive species, aggressive, unpredictable, and barely capable of interstellar travel. The early years had been difficult, with several embarrassing incidents that had nearly resulted in humanity being classified as a monitoring-required species, essentially galactic probation. But gradually, through careful diplomacy and strategic restraint, humans had carved out a unique niche in the Council. They became known as the mediators, the voice of reason when ancient species feuds threatened to escalate into system-wide conflicts. The Antha had been at each other's throats for 3, until human negotiators had found a solution that satisfied both sides. The trade disputes between the silicon-based empire and the gas giant dwelling had been resolved through human-proposed compromises that increased prosperity for both civilizations. Sarah had been part of those negotiations, slowly climbing through the diplomatic ranks until she became Earth's primary representative to the Council. Her success had been built on one fundamental principle: never let them see you angry. Humans, she had learned, were terrifyingly effective when they stopped being polite. The galaxy wasn't ready for that truth. The shuttle docked with a barely perceptible vibration, and Sarah gathered her materials. Today's session was supposed to be routine, a discussion of mining rights in the neutral sector and some minor trade regulation updates. Nothing that should require the kind of emotional control that had made her famous among her peers. As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah noted the usual mix of species going about their business. The glided past on their tentacle-like appendages, their translucent bodies shimmering with internal light patterns that indicated their current emotional state. A group of warriors clanked by in their environmental suits, the bear-like aliens requiring much higher gravity than the station's standard setting. Near the information kiosks, several floated in their mobility spheres filled with the methane-rich atmosphere they breathed. "Ambassador," the voice belonged to Counselor, one of the representatives. The alien approached with the quick, precise movements characteristic of his species. His 4 arms gestured in what Sarah recognized as a formal greeting. "How wonderful to see you again. I trust your journey was pleasant." "Very much so, Counselor. And how are your offspring? I remember you mentioning that your eldest was beginning her military service." Sarah's perfect recall of personal details had endeared her to countless council members over the years. It was amazing how few beings bothered to remember such things, and how much goodwill could be generated by simply paying attention. Santeni twitched with pleasure. "She has been assigned to the Frontier Scouts. Dangerous work, but she's always been adventurous, too much like her genetic donor, I fear." As they walked toward the main assembly hall, whispered updates about the day's agenda. "The delegation has requested to add an item about increased piracy in the Outer Rim. Apparently, several of their merchant vessels have been attacked in the past month." Sarah frowned slightly. Piracy had been on the rise throughout the galaxy, but the attacks had generally been attributed to independent raiders, not organized groups. "Any idea what's changed?" "Unknown. They aren't sharing details yet, but Ambassador seemed unusually agitated during the pre-session briefing." They entered the massive assembly hall, a circular chamber with seating arranged in concentric rings around a central platform. Each species had their own section with appropriate environmental controls, The aquatic pelagics had their water-filled viewing tanks, while the energy-based existed as contained plasma fields within specialized containment units. Sarah took her place in the human section, noting that she was, as usual, the only representative present. Most species sent delegations of dozens or even hundreds of beings. Humans sent one diplomat and one aide, another example of their famous efficiency. Council speaker, an ancient whose body had taken on the deep blue coloration that indicated extreme old age, called the session to order. The bioluminescent patterns in the chamber walls shifted to a formal white, and the constant low-level chatter fell silent. Honored members of the Galactic Council, we gather today to address several matters of mutual interest. First, let us review the mining rights proposals for the sector. Sarah settled in for what she expected to be a long, tedious session of bureaucratic minutiae. The mining rights discussion alone would probably take 3 hours, with each affected species needing to voice their concerns and propose modifications to the agreements. She had brought her tablet loaded with alternative solutions and compromise positions, ready to smooth over any conflicts that might arise. The mining discussion proceeded exactly as she had predicted. The wanted exclusive rights to 3 asteroid belts rich in the rare metals their technology required. The claim that mining operations would interfere with the migration patterns of the space-dwelling creatures they cultivated for food. They were concerned about security, insisting that any mining operations needed to include defensive installations to protect against pirate raids. Sarah had quietly suggested a rotation system for the asteroid belts, allowing each species access during different periods while ensuring that they could maintain their cultivation schedules. The defensive installations could be jointly funded and operated, spreading the cost while providing security for all parties. Within 2 hours, a solution had been hammered out that satisfied everyone's primary concerns. Once again, we find ourselves in debt to the wisdom of our human colleagues, Speaker said, his internal lights pulsing with satisfaction. Ambassador, your species continues to demonstrate why they are so valued in these proceedings. Sarah inclined her head graciously. The Council's willingness to consider creative solutions makes such outcomes possible, honored Speaker. The session moved on to trade regulations, a mind-numbingly complex discussion of tariff structures and shipping lane assignments. Sarah found her attention beginning to wander, a dangerous tendency that she ruthlessly suppressed. Maintaining focus during boring proceedings was part of what made human diplomats so effective. They never missed the small details that could derail larger agreements. It was during the discussion of antimatter containment standards that ambassador of the requested permission to address the Council about the piracy situation. The massive bear-like alien stood nearly 3 meters tall even in the station's reduced gravity, his thick fur bristling with agitation. Honored Council members, began, his voice carrying the deep rumble that made speech sound like distant thunder. The situation in the Outer Rim has become concerning. In the past 30 rotations, 17 merchant vessels have been attacked. These were not simple raids for cargo. The attackers showed detailed knowledge of our shipping schedules, our security protocols, and the specific locations of our most valuable shipments. Sarah felt a small chill of unease. Organized piracy was always troubling, but what was describing sounded like something more systematic. She made a note to request detailed reports from the Earth Intelligence Service when she returned to the embassy. Furthermore, continued, the attackers have been using weapons and tactics that are unusual. Our military analysts believe that someone has been providing them with advanced technology and training. Counselor spoke up from the section. Honored, are you suggesting that one of the Council species is supporting these pirates? The ambassador's small eyes glittered with barely suppressed anger. I am suggesting nothing. I am stating facts. Someone with access to classified shipping information and advanced military technology is organizing these attacks. The raids are too precise, too well-coordinated to be the work of independent criminals. A susurrus of concerned chatter arose from various sections of the chamber. The idea that a Council species might be secretly supporting piracy was deeply disturbing. The Galactic Council had been founded on principles of mutual cooperation and peaceful resolution of conflicts. If one of the member species was violating those principles. Speaker's lights shifted to a deep orange pattern that Sarah recognized as indicating serious concern. These are grave accusations, Ambassador. Do you have evidence to support your conclusions? I have the wreckage of 17 ships and the testimonies of the few survivors, replied grimly. But I also have something more. He activated a holographic projector, and an image appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a sleek, predatory-looking ship unlike anything Sarah had seen before. This vessel attacked the merchant freighter Iron Claw 3 rotations ago. Note the design elements. The hull configuration is clearly based on energy channeling technology, but it incorporates atmospheric processing systems and what appear to be biomechanical control interfaces. Sarah leaned forward, studying the image more carefully. The ship was indeed a hybrid design, combining technologies from at least 3 different species. Building such a vessel would require not just access to diverse technologies, but also the expertise to integrate them effectively. That suggested a level of cooperation and resources that went far beyond typical pirate operations. Moreover, continued, the attack patterns show clear evidence of tactical doctrine. The precision strikes, the coordinated assault vectors, even the timing of the attacks, all consistent with military training. Counselor shot to his feet, his 4 arms gesticulating angrily. This is outrageous. Are you accusing the collective of sponsoring pirates? We have been loyal members of this council for over 2. I accuse no one, replied steadily. I merely present the evidence. Someone is using tactics, technology, engineering, and biotechnology to arm and train pirates who are attacking council shipping. The conclusion is obvious. 1 or more council species are involved. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from a dozen species began shouting accusations and denials. The delegation's methane-filled spheres began flashing angry red lights. Several representatives started broadcasting the crystalline harmonics that served as their equivalent of raised voices. Even the usually serene showed agitated color patterns rippling through their translucent bodies. Sarah sat quietly in the midst of the uproar, her mind working through the implications of what she had heard. If was correct, then the galaxy was facing something unprecedented, a coordinated attack on the Council's fundamental principles by its own members. The economic and political ramifications could destabilize decades of carefully maintained peace. Speaker was attempting to restore order, his bioluminescent patterns cycling through increasingly urgent combinations. Honored members, please, we must approach this matter rationally. But rationality seemed to be in short supply. 3 of suppressed suspicions and ancient grudges were boiling to the surface. The delegation was demanding a formal investigation into military records. They were insisting on complete transparency from all species regarding their recent technology transfers. They wanted immediate sanctions against anyone who could be proven to have leaked classified information. It was Counselor of the Pelagic Assembly who finally said what everyone was thinking. The aquatic being's translation device converted his sonic communications into standard galactic. Perhaps it's time we address the real issue here. We've been pretending for centuries that we're all equals in this council, but we know that's not true. Some species have more advanced technology, others have larger fleets, and some have historical grievances that have never been properly resolved. Maybe someone has finally decided that the current system isn't working for them anymore. The chamber fell silent, had voiced the uncomfortable truth that everyone knew but no one wanted to acknowledge. The Galactic Council worked as long as everyone agreed to work within its framework, but if 1 or more species decided to pursue their interests through other means. The pelagic representative raises a valid point, said Prime Unit Designation 7742, its artificial voice carrying no emotion despite the gravity of its words. This council has succeeded because all members have benefited from cooperation. If some now find greater advantage in conflict, then our fundamental assumptions may need to be reconsidered. Sarah felt the temperature in the human section drop slightly as the station's environmental systems struggled to maintain optimal conditions for every species simultaneously. It seemed like a fitting metaphor for what was happening to the council itself. The careful balance that had kept everyone comfortable was beginning to fail. Speaker's lights had shifted to the deep red pattern that indicated severe stress. Honored members, we cannot allow suspicion and mistrust to destroy what we have built together. There must be a rational explanation for these attacks that doesn't require us to assume treachery among our own. Rational? His voice carried a bitter edge. 17 ships destroyed, hundreds of crew members killed, and you want to talk about rational explanations? The evidence is clear. Council technologies are being used against council members. Someone in this chamber knows exactly who is responsible. He turned to face the human section, and Sarah felt a chill as his small eyes fixed on her. In fact, I find it interesting that our human colleagues have been remarkably quiet during this discussion. Usually, Ambassador has a solution ready for every problem. But today, when we're dealing with pirates who seem to know exactly how to exploit council security protocols, the galaxy's most diplomatic species has nothing to say. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her, representing dozens of species, each one beginning to wonder if humanity's reputation for perfect diplomatic solutions might be hiding something darker. Leaned close to whisper urgently in her ear, "Ambassador, you need to respond. They're starting to suspect us." Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing the suspicion beginning to crystallize in alien faces and energy patterns. For 2 centuries, humanity had carefully maintained its image as the galaxy's neutral mediator, the species that could be trusted to find peaceful solutions because they had no agenda beyond maintaining stability. Now that reputation was about to become humanity's greatest vulnerability. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of the entire chamber's attention. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly calm, carrying just the right note of concerned professionalism. "Ambassador raises troubling questions that deserve serious investigation," she began. "Humanity stands ready to assist in any inquiry the Council deems appropriate. Our intelligence services will share any relevant information about shipping patterns or suspicious activities in human space." It was exactly the kind of measured, cooperative response that the galaxy had come to expect from human diplomats. But as Sarah looked around the chamber, she could see that it wasn't enough. The seeds of suspicion had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. The session continued for another 3 hours, but the collegial atmosphere that usually characterized council meetings had been completely destroyed. Species that had cooperated for centuries were now eyeing each other with mistrust. Ancient alliances were being quietly reconsidered. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace was beginning to shift in unpredictable ways. As the session finally ended, Sarah gathered her materials with mechanical precision. It was unusually quiet as they made their way back toward the docking bay, both of them aware that other representatives were watching their every move with new interest. "Ambassador," said quietly as they entered their shuttle, "what do we really know about these pirate attacks?" Sarah was silent for a long moment as the shuttle pulled away from the station. Through the viewport, she could see the lights of dozens of other ships carrying representatives back to there, each one probably having urgent conversations about what they had witnessed today. "We know exactly what everyone else knows," she finally replied, "but I suspect that's about to change very quickly." As their shuttle jumped to hyperspace, carrying them back toward Earth, Sarah began composing a priority message to the Colonial Defense Ministry. Because if someone was using Council technologies to organize pirate attacks, then humanity's long-maintained facade of peaceful cooperation might be about to face its ultimate test. And if that happened, the galaxy was going to learn exactly why humans had spent 2 centuries being so very, very polite. Admiral Harrison stood in the war room deep beneath the Geneva military complex, studying the holographic display that showed the current disposition of human military assets across the galaxy. Red markers indicated confirmed pirate attacks, yellow ones showed suspected incidents, and green markers showed the locations of human naval vessels. There were far too many red markers, and not nearly enough green ones. "The attacks are definitely escalating," reported Colonel James Park, the head of Human Intelligence Services. His uniform was crisp despite the fact that he'd been working for 36 hours straight since Ambassador's priority message had arrived. 17 ships in the past month, but that's just what they've reported to the Council. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected at least 12 other incidents that haven't been officially acknowledged. Harrison turned from the display to face the assembled officers. At 55, she was one of the youngest admirals in human history, but her rise through the ranks had been meteoric following her performance during the border incident 5 years earlier. That crisis had been resolved diplomatically before it could escalate into actual warfare, but Harrison's tactical preparations had impressed even the pacifist politicians who normally viewed the military with suspicion. "Colonel, what's your assessment of the threat level to human assets?" "Growing by the day, Admiral. Three of our merchant vessels have gone missing in the past 2 weeks: the freighter New Kyoto, the passenger liner Harmony, and the cargo hauler Desert Wind. All were traveling through sectors where we've detected unusual sensor readings. Doctor, the head of the research division, looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing the technical data from the attack recordings. Admiral, I've analyzed the ship configurations that Ambassador presented to the Council. The technological integration is impressive and troubling. How so? The hybrid system shouldn't work. Energy technology operates on completely different principles from atmospheric processing. The fact that someone has successfully combined them suggests a level of technical expertise that very few organizations possess. Activated her own holographic projector, showing a detailed breakdown of the pirate vessel's design. But more concerning is what they've left out. Harrison studied the rotating image of the sleek attack ship. What do you mean? Look at the weapon systems, Admiral. They're using modified versions of plasma cannons and kinetic accelerators. Powerful but not cutting-edge. They have access to energy manipulation technology, but they're not using it for weapons, only for propulsion and stealth systems. Colonel Park leaned forward. They're trying not to leave signatures that could be traced back to specific council species. Exactly. Someone is very carefully selecting which technologies to use and which to avoid. This isn't random theft or black market acquisition. This is a deliberately planned operation designed to avoid detection while maximizing effectiveness. Paused, her expression grim. Admiral, whoever is behind this has access to classified technical specifications from at least 6 different council species. The implications hung heavy in the air. The kind of access was describing could only come from very high levels within the galactic community. Either multiple species were cooperating in these attacks, or someone had managed to penetrate the security of multiple council governments simultaneously. There's something else, Park continued. Our signals intelligence teams have been monitoring council communications since the session yesterday. The level of suspicion and paranoia is off the charts. 3 species have recalled their ambassadors for consultations. They have placed their border fleets on high alert. Even they are restricting access to their biotechnology research facilities. Harrison felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders. She'd seen this pattern before in smaller conflicts. The cascade effect where suspicion bred more suspicion until everyone was pointing weapons at everyone else. What's the timeline looking like? At the current rate of escalation, I'd estimate we have maybe 2 weeks before someone starts shooting at someone else. Once that happens, Park shrugged. The Council has never faced a full-scale conflict between member species. We don't know how their collective defense agreements would hold up under that kind of stress. Doctor cleared her throat. Admiral, there's one more thing. I've been reviewing the attack patterns and I've noticed something odd. The pirates seem to be specifically targeting shipments of certain materials. What kind of materials? Rare earth elements, bioneural processors, quantum computation matrices, basically, all the components needed for advanced AI systems. Brought up a new display showing shipping manifests from attacked vessels. At first glance, it looks like they're just going after the most valuable cargo. But when you analyze what they're actually taking versus what they're leaving behind, a pattern emerges. Harrison studied the data, her trained military mind immediately recognizing the significance. They're building something that requires advanced artificial intelligence. That would be my assessment, Admiral. And given the sophistication of the technologies they've already demonstrated, whatever they're building is likely to be extremely dangerous. The war room fell silent as the officers contemplated the implications. An unknown force with access to Council technologies was systematically acquiring the components needed for advanced AI systems while simultaneously destabilizing the galactic government through carefully orchestrated attacks. It was the kind of threat that military strategists had theoretical contingency plans for, but had never actually expected to face. Harrison's secure communicator chimed with an incoming priority message. She activated the holographic display, and Ambassador's image appeared, transmitted from the human embassy on the Council station. Admiral, we have a problem. The Council has voted to establish a joint investigation commission to look into the pirate attacks. Each major species is contributing investigators, intelligence analysts, and security personnel. The expression was carefully neutral, but Harrison could read the tension in her colleague's posture. The investigation will have broad powers to access shipping records, communication logs, and military deployment data from all participating species. Including humanity, I assume. Especially humanity. Ambassador has been persistent in his suggestions that our diplomatic neutrality might be hiding something more sinister. Several other species are beginning to echo his concerns. Harrison cursed silently. A joint investigation with broad powers meant that human military capabilities that had been carefully concealed for 2 centuries might be exposed to galactic scrutiny. The facade of peaceful cooperation that had protected Earth was beginning to crack. Ambassador, what's your assessment of the political situation? Deteriorating rapidly. Trust between species is breaking down, and everyone is looking for someone to blame. They are demanding access to tactical databases. They want to inspect all biotechnology transfers from the past decade. They are threatening to withdraw from the Council entirely if they're subjected to what they're calling invasive security procedures. Doctor leaned closer to the display. Ambassador, have any of the Council species mentioned developing advanced AI systems recently, perhaps as part of research collaborations or defense initiatives? His eyes sharpened. Actually, yes. 6 months ago, there was a proposal for a joint research project to develop predictive algorithms for trade route optimization. It was supposed to be a civilian initiative, but it would have required exactly the kind of components that Doctor mentioned: quantum computation matrices, bioneural processors, advanced sensor arrays. Which species were involved in this project? Harrison asked. All of them. It was proposed as a council-wide initiative that would benefit everyone. The project was approved unanimously and given a substantial budget allocation. Paused, her expression growing troubled. The interesting thing is that the project was proposed by a joint committee rather than any individual species. No one seemed to know exactly who had originated the idea. Colonel Park was already working at his console, pulling up intelligence files on council research initiatives. Admiral, if someone wanted to acquire advanced AI components legally, a council-approved research project would be the perfect cover. They could requisition materials through official channels, hire technical specialists from multiple species, and even establish secure research facilities without raising suspicions. Harrison felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. A joint research project would also explain how someone gained access to classified technologies from multiple species. If the project had official council backing, researchers would be sharing technical specifications freely. But who would be running such a project? Asked. The council bureaucracy is transparent by design. Every initiative has oversight committees, regular progress reports, and multiple levels of approval. Doctor had been quietly working at her own terminal while the others talked. Now she looked up with an expression of dawning realization. What if that's exactly the point? What if someone has been using the Council's own transparency and cooperation protocols against it? She activated her holographic projector again, this time showing an organizational chart of Council research initiatives. Look at this. Over the past 5 years, there have been dozens of joint research projects involving AI development, quantum computing, biotechnology integration, and advanced materials science. Each one was approved through normal channels, overseen by multinational committees, and funded through standard council budgets. The chart expanded, showing connections between different projects, shared personnel, and resource transfers. What had initially looked like separate initiatives began to reveal a pattern of interconnection that was far too complex to be coincidental. Someone has been playing a very long game, Harrison said slowly, using legitimate research projects to develop technologies and capabilities while simultaneously gathering intelligence on every major species in the galaxy. Its image flickered as the transmission adjusted for increased security encryption. Admiral, I need to know, what are our actual military capabilities? If this investigation proceeds, they're going to want detailed information about human naval assets, weapons technology, and strategic capabilities. How much can I safely reveal? Harrison looked around the war room, taking in the displays showing human military strength deployed across the galaxy. For 2 centuries, humanity had deliberately cultivated an image of peaceful weakness while secretly building one of the most advanced military forces in known space. The decision to hide their true capabilities had been made by humanity's leaders after the early diplomatic disasters. when it became clear that the galaxy feared aggressive species far more than it respected them. But maintaining that facade was becoming increasingly difficult. Human technology had advanced far beyond what they claimed publicly. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their intelligence capabilities more sophisticated than any other species realized. The Colonial Defense Force could probably defeat any two Council species in open conflict, and quite possibly more than that if they had adequate warning and preparation time. The problem was that revealing those capabilities now would confirm every suspicion that species like the were beginning to harbor about humanity's true intentions. Ambassador, you can reveal our basic fleet dispositions and defensive capabilities, but keep the technical specifications vague. If they press for detailed weapon system data or strategic deployment information, refer them to Earth for official response. And if they demand immediate access as part of the investigation. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that could determine humanity's future in the galactic community. Finally, she activated her command console and began issuing orders to the fleet commanders. Then we'll give them exactly what they're asking for. All ships, increase readiness to alert status 2. Begin discreet redeployment to defensive positions around Earth and the major colonies. Authorization code Harrison Alpha 77. The war room erupted into controlled activity as the Admiral's orders were transmitted across the galaxy. Alert status 2 meant that human naval forces would be combat-ready within 6 hours, with all ships fully armed and prepared for immediate deployment. It was the highest state of readiness that humanity had maintained since the border incident. Colonel Park looked up from his communications console. Admiral, should we also activate the Deep Space Monitoring Network? Harrison nodded grimly. The Deep Space Monitoring Network was one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets, a web of automated sensor platforms and stealth reconnaissance drones that provided early warning coverage across most of the galaxy. If activated to full operational status, it would give human intelligence services real-time information about the movement of every major fleet in Council space. Full activation, Colonel. If someone is planning to use this investigation as cover for military action, I want to know about it before they do. Doctor had continued her analysis of the research project connections while the military preparations proceeded around her. Admiral, I think I've found something. Look at this personnel transfer pattern. The holographic display showed a complex web of researcher assignments across the various joint projects. Scientists and engineers from different species had been moved between projects with what appeared to be routine frequency. But when analyzed over a 5-year period, the pattern revealed something disturbing. Someone has been systematically ensuring that key personnel from each major species have worked on projects involving their own government's most sensitive technologies. An energy specialist would work on quantum computing, then transfer to a project involving bioneural integration, then move to advanced materials research. Highlighted specific individuals as she spoke. Each transfer exposed them to technologies from other species, while giving them access to their own government's classified systems. Industrial espionage on a galactic scale, said from the communications display. But who has the authority to arrange personnel transfers across multiple species and research projects? Harrison felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. Someone with access to the Council's administrative systems. Someone who has been in a position to influence research funding, personnel assignments, and project approvals for years. The implications were staggering. If someone within the Council's own bureaucratic structure had been orchestrating these activities, then the pirate attacks were just the visible portion of a much larger operation. An operation that had been years in the making and was now entering its final phase. Admiral, Colonel Park said urgently, I'm receiving reports of unusual activity in the outer rim sectors. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple large ships moving in coordinated formations. The configurations don't match any known Council fleet. Harrison moved to the tactical display, studying the sensor readings that were being transmitted from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The unknown ships were indeed moving in formation, but their energy signatures were unlike anything in the human database of galactic vessels. Doctor, could those be ships built using the hybrid technologies we've been analyzing? Studied the sensor data, her expression growing increasingly troubled. The energy patterns are consistent with propulsion systems, but the mass readings suggest much larger vessels than we've seen before. If someone has been using the research projects to develop scaled-up versions of the hybrid technology. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the war room understood the implications. The pirate attacks had been testing and refining the hybrid technology. The research projects had been gathering intelligence and acquiring materials. Now, someone was revealing the true scope of their preparations. "Admiral," said from the communication display, "the council session is reconvening in 4 hours for an emergency meeting about the investigation. Several species are demanding immediate action, and the political situation is becoming increasingly unstable." Harrison looked around the war room, taking in the controlled chaos of military preparation and intelligence analysis. For 2 centuries, humanity had worked to avoid exactly this kind of situation. They had been the peacemakers, the mediators, the voice of calm reason in a galaxy full of ancient grudges and competing interests. But that facade had been built on the assumption that the major threats would come from conflicts between existing council species, not from unknown forces that had been systematically infiltrating and manipulating the galactic government itself. "Colonel, what's our current fleet strength in council space?" 47 combat vessels within immediate response range of the council station, with another 130 ships within 12 hours travel time. "But Admiral, if we reveal that kind of force presence..." "I know, Colonel, but if we don't, and this investigation is being used as a distraction while unknown forces move against council targets, then we might not have a galactic government left to worry about." Harrison activated the secure communication system that connected her directly to the highest levels of human government. In a few minutes, she would be briefing the colonial president and the defense minister on a situation that could fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the galactic community. As she waited for the connection to establish, Harrison found herself thinking about the careful balance that human diplomacy had maintained for 2 centuries. That balance was about to be tested in ways that no one had anticipated, and the decisions made in the next few hours could determine whether humanity's future lay in continued cooperation or in the kind of conflict that the galaxy had managed to avoid for. The communication system chimed, indicating that Earth was ready to receive her report. Harrison took a deep breath and began to explain to her superiors why the galaxy's most peaceful species was about to reveal that they had been preparing for war all along. Ambassador Sarah walked through the corridors of the council station with measured steps, but internally her mind was racing through contingencies and diplomatic scenarios. The emergency session was set to begin in 2 hours, and the political atmosphere had grown increasingly toxic since her last communication with Admiral Harrison. Representatives from 7 different species had approached her with varying combinations of accusations, demands for information, and thinly veiled threats. Hurried to keep pace beside her, his tablet displaying a constant stream of updates from human intelligence networks across the galaxy. "Ambassador, we've received confirmation that they have placed their entire merchant fleet under military escort. They are recalling their deep space exploration vessels. Even they are implementing security protocols that they haven't used since the war 3 centuries ago." Sarah nodded grimly. The cascade of defensive measures was exactly what she had feared would happen. Each species' attempt to protect themselves was being interpreted by others as preparation for aggressive action. Within hours, the galaxy could find itself on the brink of the first multi-species conflict in recorded council history. "Any word from Earth about the investigation committee's demands?" "Admiral Harrison is briefing the colonial president now. The committee wants full access to our shipping logs, military deployment records, and intelligence databases. They're also requesting permission to station joint investigation teams on Earth and the major colonies." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face, her diplomatic composure finally showing cracks. "They want to put foreign intelligence operatives on Earth. Do they have any idea what that would mean?" Of course they didn't. The galactic community still saw humanity as a minor species with limited military capabilities and no significant strategic assets to protect. They had no concept of the advanced technologies, defensive installations, and classified research facilities that existed throughout human space. Allowing foreign investigators unrestricted access to Earth would be like handing over the keys to humanity's most carefully guarded secrets. but refusing the request would confirm every suspicion that species like they had been harboring about humanity's true nature. Send a coded message to Admiral Harrison. Tell her that I need a complete assessment of what the investigation teams would be able to discover if given unrestricted access to our facilities. As composed the message, Sarah continued toward the assembly hall, passing groups of alien representatives engaged in heated discussions. The normal collegial atmosphere of the station had been replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion and barely controlled hostility. She could see security personnel taking positions near critical systems, while energy constructs were performing what looked suspiciously like defensive scans of the station's infrastructure. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control through normal diplomatic channels. Sarah had spent her entire career believing that any conflict could be resolved through careful negotiation and mutual understanding. Now, she was beginning to wonder if there were some problems that couldn't be solved by being reasonable. As she entered the assembly hall, Sarah noticed that the seating arrangements had changed. Where before the various species had been intermixed in a display of galactic unity, now each delegation had clustered together in clearly defined groups. The sat with both species known for their military traditions. They had positioned themselves near the emergency exits, a tactical arrangement that hadn't gone unnoticed by the other representatives. Most telling of all, the human section was now completely isolated, with empty seats creating a buffer zone between Sarah and the nearest alien representatives. The galaxy's most trusted mediators had become pariahs in less than 24 hours. Speaker called the emergency session to order, his bioluminescent patterns cycling through agitated colors that Sarah had never seen before. Honored members, we face an unprecedented crisis that threatens the foundations of our galactic community. The investigation committee has prepared an initial report on the pirate attacks, and their findings are disturbing. Committee Chairman L, a senior administrator who had served the council for over 40 years, activated the chamber's central holographic display. The image that appeared sent a collective shudder through the assembled representatives. It was a detailed schematic of the hybrid pirate vessels, but now the analysis showed something that hadn't been visible in the earlier presentations. The attackers are not using randomly acquired technologies, L announced, his forearms gesticulating with barely controlled anger. Every component, every system integration, every tactical doctrine employed by these vessels represents the absolute cutting edge of Council military science. These ships are not the product of theft or black market acquisition. They are the result of deliberate, systematic access to our most classified defense technologies. The holographic display expanded to show technical specifications that made Sarah's blood run cold. The hybrid ships weren't just combining different species' technologies. They were using improved versions of those technologies, incorporating refinements and enhancements that suggested a level of understanding that went far beyond simple copying. Furthermore, L continued, our investigation has revealed that the joint research projects approved by this council over the past 5 years have been systematically stripped of their most advanced developments. Quantum computation matrices, bioneural processors, energy manipulation systems, all have been diverted from their intended research applications. Ambassador rose from his seat, his massive frame radiating barely contained fury. The evidence is clear. Someone within this chamber has been using council resources to build a private military force. Someone with access to our most sensitive technologies and the authority to manipulate our own research programs against us. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes focusing on the human section. The isolation that had seemed merely political a few minutes earlier now felt distinctly threatening. She could see security personnel from various species beginning to shift position, cutting off potential escape routes from the assembly hall. The investigation committee has identified several species as having the technical capability and administrative access necessary to orchestrate these activities, L announced. However, one species stands out as having been involved in every compromised project, every suspicious personnel transfer, and every administrative decision that enabled these thefts. The holographic display shifted to show a timeline of human involvement in council activities over the past 5 years. Sarah watched with growing dread as the connections were laid out in undeniable detail. Human diplomats had indeed been present for every major decision. Human technical advisors had participated in most of the research projects. Human administrative staff had processed many of the personnel transfers that had enabled the intelligence gathering. It was a perfect frame-up, she realized. Someone had been using humanity's reputation for helpful cooperation to position them as the fall guys for a much larger operation. Every time human representatives had offered assistance or provided expertise, they had unknowingly been creating evidence of their own involvement in the conspiracy. "The pattern is unmistakable," declared, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "For 2 centuries, humanity has positioned itself as the galaxy's neutral mediator, the species that could be trusted to resolve conflicts fairly. But what if that reputation was deliberately cultivated to gain access to information and technologies from every other species?" Counselor spoke up from the section, his antennae twitching with agitation. "Ambassador raises troubling questions. Humanity's diplomatic successes have indeed given them unprecedented access to sensitive information from all Council species. Their trade agreements, mediation services, and technical consultations have provided them with detailed knowledge of our capabilities, weaknesses, and strategic priorities." Sarah finally stood, her movement causing a ripple of tension through the chamber as security personnel prepared for potential confrontation. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm professionalism that had made her famous throughout the galaxy, but now it seemed to have a different edge to it. "Honored members, I understand your concerns, and humanity is prepared to cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation. However, I must point out that the evidence being presented is entirely circumstantial. Yes, human representatives have been involved in many council activities. That's what diplomatic cooperation means." She activated her own holographic projector, displaying data that had prepared from human intelligence files. "But let me show you what a real conspiracy looks like." The image that appeared in the center of the chamber was a detailed analysis of the administrative decisions that had enabled the technology thefts. Sarah had spent the past hour working to trace the decision trees, authorization chains, and resource allocation patterns that had made the joint research projects possible. Every major decision that enabled these thefts was initiated through Council administrative channels, Sarah explained, highlighting specific data points. Personnel transfers were approved by the Administrative Review Board. Research funding was allocated by the Science Coordination Committee. Technical specifications were shared through the Technology Transfer Office. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing than the accusations against humanity. The conspiracy hadn't been run by any single species. It had been orchestrated by someone with access to the Council's own administrative systems. "Someone within the Council's bureaucratic structure has been manipulating our own procedures to enable these activities," Sarah continued. "They used legitimate channels to gather intelligence, acquire resources, and position assets while making it appear that individual species were responsible." Dr. Ha of the delegation suddenly shifted to a deep purple coloration pattern that Sarah recognized as indicating extreme shock. "Ambassador, are you suggesting that our own administrative systems have been compromised?" "I'm suggesting that we're dealing with an inside job, but not in the way that Ambassador believes. The real conspiracy has been using the Council's own bureaucracy to manipulate all of us, including humanity." Sarah's projector displayed a new set of data communication logs, authorization codes, and administrative records that painted a very different picture of the past 5 years' events. "Look at the timing of these decisions. Look at the authorization patterns. Look at who had the administrative access necessary to coordinate activities across multiple species and research projects." The silence in the chamber was deafening as the assembled representatives studied the data. What they saw was a pattern of manipulation that went far beyond anything a single species could have accomplished. The conspiracy had required access to systems and information that only someone within the Council's highest administrative levels could have provided. Committee Chairman L was studying the human data with growing alarm. "These authorization codes, some of them bear my own administrative signature, but I never approved these resource transfers." "Because you didn't," Sarah replied. "Someone with access to the Council's central computer systems has been forging administrative approvals while making it appear that the decisions were made through normal channels." The implications hit the chamber like a shock wave. If the Council's own computer systems had been compromised, then every decision made over the past several years was suspect. Trade agreements, defense arrangements, research projects, even the current investigation itself could have been manipulated by whoever had gained access to the administrative networks. Speaker's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors that Sarah had never seen before, indicating a level of distress that approached panic. If our administrative systems have been compromised, then we have no way of knowing which decisions were legitimate and which were manipulated. Actually, we do, Sarah said quietly, but you're not going to like the answer. She activated a new data display, this one showing communication intercepts and sensor readings from the Human Deep Space Monitoring Network. Sarah had made the decision to reveal humanity's intelligence capabilities, knowing that the alternative was watching the galaxy tear itself apart based on false accusations. For the past century, humanity has maintained discrete monitoring systems throughout Council space. These systems were originally established for our own security, but they've also recorded the activities that I've been describing. The chamber erupted into chaos as the full implications of Sarah's revelation sank in. Humanity had been secretly monitoring galactic communications and activities for a century, gathering intelligence on every Council species, while maintaining a facade of peaceful cooperation. Spies roared, his massive frame rising to its full height. You admit that humanity has been conducting espionage operations against the Council for decades. We admit that humanity has been protecting itself in a galaxy full of species that could crush us if they decided we were a threat, Sarah replied, her diplomatic composure finally beginning to crack. And right now, that monitoring network is the only way to determine what's really been happening over the past 5 years. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed real-time data from across the galaxy. Those unknown ships that Colonel Park detected in the outer rim, they're not heading toward Council space. They're heading away from it, toward the galactic periphery where no Council species maintains a significant presence. The display zoomed in on the mysterious fleet, showing dozens of vessels moving in precise formation toward regions of space that were largely unexplored by the galactic community. The ship's energy signatures were indeed consistent with the hybrid technology that had been used in the pirate attacks, but their behavior suggested something other than preparation for military action against Council targets. Someone has been using the past 5 years to gather intelligence and acquire resources not for an attack on the Council, but for an exodus from Council space entirely, Sarah explained. The pirate attacks, the technology thefts, the personnel transfers, they were all part of a systematic effort to acquire the capabilities needed for independent colonization of the galactic rim. Doctor's voice came through Sarah's secure communicator, transmitted from the war room on Earth. Ambassador, we've completed our analysis of the ship configurations and resource acquisition patterns. Based on the technologies they've acquired and the scale of their fleet, we estimate that someone has been preparing to establish a completely independent civilization beyond the reach of Council authority. The chamber fell silent as the assembled representatives absorbed this information. The conspiracy they had been dealing with wasn't an attempt to destroy or conquer the galactic community. It was an attempt to escape from it entirely. But who, Speaker asked, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated complete bewilderment. Which species has the motivation and capability to attempt such a massive undertaking? Sarah was studying the data streams from the Human Monitoring Network when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The unknown fleet wasn't just leaving Council space. It was following routes that would take it through regions where several missing research vessels had been reported over the past year. I don't think it's a species, she said slowly. I think it's individuals, scientists, engineers, administrators, and military personnel from multiple species who have been working together to establish their own civilization. The holographic display shifted to show personnel records from the compromised research projects. As the data was analyzed in real time, a pattern emerged that was even more shocking than anything they had discovered so far. Look at the personnel transfer patterns again, Sarah said, highlighting specific individuals in the display. These aren't random assignments or administrative manipulations. These are the galaxy's most brilliant scientists and engineers, systematically recruited from every major species and gradually moved into positions where they could access the technologies they needed. Was working frantically at his tablet, cross-referencing the personnel data with missing person reports and unexplained resignations from various council institutions. Ambassador, we're seeing correlation with reports of missing scientists and researchers from across the galaxy. Over the past 2 years, nearly 300 individuals with advanced technical specializations have disappeared without explanation. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Someone had been systematically recruiting the galaxy's intellectual elite, providing them with access to advanced technologies from multiple species, and enabling them to construct a fleet capable of independent colonization, all while using the Council's own administrative systems to cover their tracks and deflect suspicion onto species like humanity. "The question now," Sarah said, looking around the chamber at representatives who were beginning to realize the true scope of what they were dealing with, "is whether we're going to continue pointing accusations at each other while the real conspirators escape with stolen Council technologies, or whether we're going to work together to determine exactly who has been manipulating all of us." Ambassador was staring at the holographic displays with an expression of dawning realization. "If you're correct, Ambassador, then my accusations against humanity have been part of their plan. They wanted us to suspect each other, to destabilize the Council while they completed their preparations." "That would be my assessment," Sarah replied. "And if we don't stop fighting among ourselves and start working together, they're going to succeed in escaping with technologies and knowledge that took our civilizations to develop." The chamber was silent as the assembled representatives contemplated the magnitude of the betrayal they had uncovered. Hundreds of their minds had been systematically turned against their own governments, stealing technologies and resources to establish a rival civilization beyond the reach of Council authority. But perhaps even more disturbing was the realization of how close the conspiracy had come to succeeding. If humanity's intelligence capabilities hadn't been revealed, the Council might have torn itself apart while the real conspirators escaped undetected. Speaker's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to the deep blue coloration that indicated serious contemplation. "Ambassador, humanity has revealed significant intelligence capabilities in order to provide this information. That raises questions about your species' previous claims regarding your military and technological limitations." Sarah felt the weight of 2 centuries of careful diplomatic deception pressing down on her shoulders. The moment she had been dreading since becoming Earth's representative had finally arrived. The moment when humanity's carefully maintained facade would have to be abandoned. "Speaker, humanity has indeed been less than fully transparent about our capabilities. We have advanced technologies, sophisticated intelligence networks, and military assets that we have deliberately kept hidden from the galactic community." The admission sent another shock wave through the chamber. Sarah could see alien representatives frantically activating their communicators to report this revelation to their home governments. "However," she continued, "we maintained this deception not to threaten other species, but to protect ourselves from the kind of suspicion and persecution that less powerful species have historically faced. Today's events demonstrate exactly why we felt such caution was necessary." She gestured toward the holographic displays showing the escaping conspiracy fleet. "If we had revealed our true capabilities 2 centuries ago, would you have trusted us to mediate your disputes? Would you have shared technological information with us? Or would you have seen us as another potential threat to be contained or eliminated?" The question hung in the air, forcing the assembled representatives to confront uncomfortable truths about the galactic community's treatment of species that were perceived as too weak or too strong to fit comfortably into the existing power structure. "But now that facade has been stripped away," observed. "What happens next, Ambassador? What does humanity want from the galactic community now that your true nature has been revealed?" Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of beings who had spent centuries building a delicate balance of cooperation and mutual respect. That balance was now shattered, replaced by uncertainty and suspicion that would take years to overcome. "What happens next," she said quietly, "depends on whether we can work together to deal with the immediate crisis. There's a rogue fleet escaping with advanced Council technologies, planning to establish an independent civilization that could eventually become a rival to everything we've built here." She activated her secure communicator, opening a direct channel to Admiral Harrison in the Earth War Room. "Admiral, I need you to brief the Council on our current military capabilities and our readiness to assist in pursuing the conspiracy fleet." Harrison's image appeared in the chamber's central holographic display, her military bearing and obvious competence immediately commanding attention from the assembled aliens. Honored Council members, the Human Colonial Defense Force currently maintains 437 combat vessels throughout the galaxy, supported by an extensive network of monitoring stations, supply bases, and defensive installations. The numbers hit the chamber like a bomb. Humanity's actual military strength was nearly 10 times larger than their official reports had indicated. They had been operating one of the largest fleets in known space, while pretending to be a minor power with limited defensive capabilities. Our vessels are equipped with advanced stealth systems, quantum entanglement communication networks, and weapons technology based on principles that several council species are still developing, Harrison continued. We can have a pursuit force ready to intercept the conspiracy fleet within 6 hours. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their capabilities, they had been building a military force that could potentially challenge any combination of council species. The galaxy's most trusted mediators had secretly become one of its most formidable powers. However, Harrison added, pursuing this fleet will require cooperation from multiple council species. The conspiracy has taken technologies from all of your governments, and stopping them will require a coordinated response that uses the best capabilities of every species present. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by alien representatives who were still processing the magnitude of humanity's deception. The careful diplomatic balance that had defined her career was gone, replaced by a new reality where humanity's true nature could no longer be hidden. "This is the choice we face," she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "We can spend the next several days arguing about who deceived whom and who can be trusted with what information. Or we can work together to prevent a group of traitors from escaping with technologies that belong to all of us." She paused, looking directly at each of the major delegation leaders. "But understand this, if we choose cooperation, it will have to be real cooperation. No more hiding capabilities, no more diplomatic deceptions, no more pretending that any of our species are exactly what they claim to be." The moment stretched out as the assembled representatives contemplated a future very different from the careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for centuries. The age of polite diplomatic fiction was ending, and what came next would depend on whether the galaxy's diverse species could find a way to trust each other with the truth.